The restaurant was a cathedral of silence and expensive tastes. Dark wood drank the light. Crystal glasses stood like sentinels on white linen. In the corner booth, the one that was never offered and never had to be asked for, sat Antonio Gallo. To the world, he was a legitimate businessman, an investor in properties and logistics. To the shadows of the city, he was the patriarch. His authority was absolute, his word was law, and his silence was more feared than another man's threat. He was an old man, built from the hard earth of a forgotten country. His suit was worth more than the car most people drove. His hands, now resting on the table, were large and scarred, a testament to a life lived before the comfort of tailored silk and polished mahogany. Across from him sat Leo, his lieutenant for 30 years. Leo was a quiet man whose stillness was a weapon. He watched the room, his eyes missing nothing. He was the keeper of the gate, the first and last line of defense for the man who needed no defense. Their conversation was sparse, a language of nods and single words that conveyed entire strategies. A deal was being finalized. A problem was being solved. The air around their table was different. It was heavier, charged with a power that the other patrons could feel but not understand. They only knew to keep their distance. To not look too long. Then, the protocol was broken. A figure moved through the carefully curated ambience, not with the confident glide of a patron, but with the hesitant, desperate shuffle of an outsider. It was a woman. A young woman in a waitress uniform that was slightly too big for her thin frame. Her face was pale, her eyes red-rimmed and wide with a fear that battled a fiercer determination. Leo's body tensed. Two other men, seated at separate tables, shifted almost imperceptibly, their hands disappearing from view. They were statues ready to spring to violent life. The restaurant manager, a man named Marcus Thorne with a slick smile and predatory eyes, started to move from his post near the kitchen. Annoyance tightened his features. He was about to intercept her, to put her out. But she was too quick. She reached their booth, her hands clenched at her sides. She did not look at Leo. She looked only at Antonio Gallo. "Please," she whispered, her voice cracking. "I need to ask for your help." Leo started to rise. "This is a private." Gallo did not look at him. He simply raised a hand, a small, almost lazy gesture that stopped everything. Leo froze. The other men relaxed. The manager halted in his tracks. The entire restaurant seemed to hold its breath. Gallo's eyes, dark and ancient, studied the young woman. He saw the worn-out shoes. He saw the frayed collar of her uniform. He saw the raw desperation of someone with nothing left to lose. It was a look he had seen before, many years ago, in a mirror. He gestured to the empty seat beside him. A seat no one ever sat in. "Sit," he said. His voice was gravel, low and calm. The woman flinched, surprised by the invitation. She hesitated, then slid into the booth, perching on the edge of the plush leather as if she might be burned by it. The manager looked on, his face a mask of confusion and outrage. This was not how the world worked. Stay with me until the end, because what happens next is a testament to the fact that true honor is not about following the law, but about doing what is right. If you believe in acts of kindness, no matter the cost, like this video and hit that subscribe button. And let us know in the comments where you are watching from. It is amazing to see how far stories like this can travel. Now, let's get started. Antonio Gallo was not a good man. He knew this. Good men did not own cities. They did not build empires on foundations of fear and favor. Good men did not have lieutenants like Leo, men who could speak volumes with the absence of a smile. But Gallo had a code. It was a strange and brutal code, forged in the poverty of his childhood and tempered in the fires of his rise to power. His rules were simple. Protect the family. Honor your word. Never, ever, prey on the weak for sport. To him, strength was a tool for building, for protecting. Those who used it to crush the helpless, to extract pleasure from the pain of those with no recourse, were not just enemies. They were vermin. He remembered his own mother. He remembered her scrubbing floors on her hands and knees, her knuckles raw and bleeding. He remembered the landlord, a fat man with a gold tooth, who would stand over her and make jokes about the dirt. The man had power. His mother had none. One day, when Gallo was 14, the landlord had gone too far. He had kicked over her bucket of water, spoiling her work, and laughed. That night, Antonio Gallo learned that even a small boy with a brick in his hand had power, too. The landlord never walked without a limp again. And Antonio Gallo never again allowed a man to disrespect a woman in his presence. It was a line etched in his soul. Now, he looked at the young woman beside him, and he saw the ghost of his mother in her tired eyes. "What is your name?" he asked. "Clara," she said, her voice barely audible. "Clara," he repeated, testing the name. "You work here." "I did," she corrected. "He fired me." "Mr. Thorne," she nodded toward the manager, who was now pretending to be busy but was watching them intently. "Why?" Clara took a shaky breath. "My son is sick. He has asthma, a bad case. He had an attack this morning, and I had to take him to the emergency room. I called, I explained I would be late, but Mr. Thorne said the lunch rush was more important than my excuses. He said if I was not here by noon, I should not bother coming back at all." Gallo remained silent, his expression unreadable. He had heard stories like this 1,000 times. The casual cruelty of small men in small positions of power. "You are not here for your job," Gallo stated. It was not a question. "No," she said, shaking her head. I left something behind. In my locker." "What did you leave?" Her face crumpled, and for a moment, he thought she would break down completely. But she held it together, her hands twisting a cheap napkin in her lap until it shredded. "It was a bear," she whispered. "A little teddy bear. His name is Captain Patches." Leo shifted slightly, his brow furrowing in confusion. A teddy bear. They were stopping a multi-million-dollar negotiation for a child's toy. Gallo's gaze never left Clara's face. "It was my son's," she continued, her voice thick with unshed tears. "My husband, his father, he gave it to him before he deployed. He was a soldier. He did not come back." The silence in the booth was now absolute. "It is the only thing my son has of his father's. He sleeps with it every night. Especially when he is sick. It helps his breathing, he says. It keeps the nightmares away." She looked up, her eyes pleading. "When I came back to get it, Mr. Thorne would not let me in. He said I was trespassing. I begged him. I told him what it was. He just laughed. He said it was trash, just like me." Gallo's knuckles turned white where they rested on the table. "He went to the staff room," Clara choked out. "He came back with it. He held it up and he threw it in the dumpster out back. He said, if you want it, get it from the garbage, and he locked the gate." Gallo closed his eyes for a single, long moment. In that darkness, he saw the landlord with the gold tooth. He saw the spilled bucket of water. He saw the casual, smiling cruelty of a man who enjoyed his power to inflict misery. He opened his eyes. The decision was already made. The world was full of monsters. Some were like him, large and dangerous, living by a code of violence and honor. But others were small, petty things, hiding in plain sight, poisoning the world with their spite. To Antonio Gallo, the second kind was far worse. He looked past Clara to where Marcus Thorne stood, preening for a wealthy couple at another table. The man was a disease. Gallo felt the cold, familiar calm settle over him. The calm that always came before the storm. He turned back to Clara. Her story was an echo of a past he had spent a lifetime trying to escape, a past he had buried under mountains of money and fortresses of fear. He had built an empire so that no one could ever make him feel that helpless again. So that no one could ever kick over his bucket of water. Yet here was this woman, this complete stranger, bringing that old, forgotten feeling back into the gilded cage of his life. He saw his mother's desperation in her downcast eyes. He heard his own childhood fear in the tremble of her voice. Leo, ever the pragmatist, saw only a complication. An unnecessary diversion. Their business was with men who understood the rules of their world. Men who dealt in ledgers and loyalty, where betrayal had a clear and final price. This was something else entirely. This was messy. It was emotional. It was about a stuffed bear. "Boss," Leo murmured, his voice low and cautious. "The port deal." Gallo silenced him again with that same, small gesture of his hand. The port deal could wait. The world could wait. For a moment, all that existed was the quiet desperation in the booth and the ugly, unknowing smile of the manager across the room. Gallo's internal calculus was swift and decisive. His code was not a matter of convenience, it was the very structure of his identity. To ignore this insult, this specific kind of cruelty, would be to betray the boy with the brick in his hand. It would be to admit that the landlord had won after all. He looked at Clara. "This bear," he said, his voice softer than Leo had heard it in years. "It is important. It is everything," she whispered. "It is his father's last promise." A promise. That was a word Gallo understood. He had built his life on promises. Promises kept. Promises broken, and the terrible consequences that followed. A soldier's last promise to his son. It was a sacred thing. Thorn had not just thrown away a toy. He had desecrated a tomb. He had spat on a grave. "I will get your son's bear back," Gallo said. It was not a boast. It was a vow. As solemn and binding as any blood oath he had ever sworn. Clara stared at him, her eyes wide with a mixture of disbelief and a tiny, fragile spark of hope. "How?" she asked. "The garbage truck, it already came." "It is gone." Gallo gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod. "Everything that is lost can be found," he said. "If you are willing to look." He reached into his jacket and pulled out a thick roll of cash. He peeled off several large bills and placed them on the table in front of her. "This is for you and your son. Go home. Be with him." Clara shook her head, pushing the money back toward him. "No. I cannot. I did not come here for money." Gallo looked at the rejected cash, then back at her. A flicker of respect showed in his dark eyes. She had honor. In her world of poverty and struggle, she had more honor than half the men he did business with. "Very well," he said, taking the money back. "Go home to your son. I will handle this." "But what about?" she began, looking toward the manager. "Mr. Thorn and I will have a conversation," Gallo said. The calmness of his tone made the words more chilling than any shout. He gave a short, sharp nod to Leo. The order was given. The machinery of his world began to turn. Leo discreetly escorted Clara out of the restaurant through a side entrance, ensuring Thorn did not see her leave with them. Gallo remained in the booth, watching the manager. He sipped his water. He waited. His patience was a predator's patience. Perfectly still. Perfectly lethal. When Leo returned, he slid back into the booth. "She is on her way home," he reported. "I have her address. Her son's hospital information." "Good," Gallo said. "Now. The garbage." "I made a call on the way," Leo said, already anticipating the command. "The truck that services this district makes its last pickup at 10 post meridian. It goes directly to the transfer station in the industrial yard. From there, the refuse is loaded onto long-haul compactors." "And where do they go?" Leo paused. "It is a state contract, boss. All municipal waste from this metropolitan area goes to one place. The Black Creek Mega Dump. It is a massive landfill." "Where is it?" "It is across the state line. Up in the mountains." Leo checked his phone. It is 412 miles from here. 412 miles. A journey into a wasteland to find a single, small item in a mountain of refuse. It was an impossible task. A fool's errand. Leo waited for Gallo to call it off. To decide it was not worth the effort. To simply give the woman a large sum of money and consider the matter settled. But Gallo did not look at him. He was still watching Marcus Thorne, who was now laughing, his head thrown back, revealing a row of teeth that were too white, too perfect. "Get the car," Gallo said quietly. "We're going for a drive." Leo's eyes widened slightly. "We are? You mean you and me?" "Yes. To the landfill." "First," Gallo said, a cold edge entering his voice, "we will pay a visit to Mr. Thorne. I need to know what he had for dinner." Leo understood. The phrase was code. It meant they needed to know everything about the man. His home, his habits, his fears. "And Leo," Gallo added, as his lieutenant was about to rise. "Call ahead. Tell our friends near Black Creek that we will need a crew. A large one. And lights. We will be working through the night." The plan was insane. The resources being marshaled, dozens of men, vehicles, equipment, all for a teddy bear. But Leo did not question it. He had learned long ago that Antonio Gallo's reasons were his own. And that his promises, no matter how strange, were always kept. The confrontation with Marcus Thorne was not what the manager expected. There was no shouting, no overt threats. Gallo and Leo waited until the restaurant was closed, until the last kitchen worker had gone home. They found Thorne in his office, counting the night's earnings, a smug look of satisfaction on his face. He did not hear them enter. When he finally looked up, they were simply there, standing in the doorway, two shadows that had detached themselves from the darkness. Thorne jumped, his heart lurching in his chest. "Who are you?" "The restaurant is closed." "We are here about the waitress," Gallo said, his voice a low rumble that seemed to be absorbed by the small room's walls. Thorne's fear quickly curdled into arrogance. He recognized Gallo as the old man from the corner booth. Probably some rich fool with a misplaced sense of chivalry. "Clara? What about her?" "She was fired. And if you are her friends, you can tell her she is not getting a single cent of severance." Gallo took a slow step into the room. Leo closed the door behind them, the soft click of the lock echoing like a gunshot. "We are not here about her job," Gallo said. "We are here about the bear." Thorne blinked. Then he laughed. A short, barking sound of disbelief. "The bear? You are kidding me. That filthy toy? I did her a favor throwing it out." "Did you?" Gallo asked. He was closer now. Thorne could smell the faint, expensive scent of his cologne. It smelled like old money and dry earth. "Tell me, Mr. Thorne. What gives a man value?" The question was so unexpected that Thorne was momentarily speechless. I do not know what you mean." "My restaurant is one of the most successful in the city. That is value." "No," Gallo said, shaking his head slowly. "That is business. I am talking about worth. The measure of a man's soul." He paused, letting the silence stretch. "A man's worth," he continued, "is measured by one thing and one thing only. How he treats someone who can do nothing for him. A child. An old woman. A waitress who just lost her job." Thorne's bravado began to falter. There was a weight in the old man's words, a deadly seriousness in his eyes that had nothing to do with a child's toy. "That bear was the last gift a soldier gave his son before he died defending his country," Gallo said, his voice dropping to a whisper. "It was a promise. And you threw it in the trash. You laughed while you did it." "It was just a thing," Thorne stammered, backing away until his chair hit the wall. "Yes," Gallo agreed. "A thing. Just like my mother's bucket of water was just a thing. Just like your restaurant is just a thing. Buildings can be bought. They can be sold. They can be closed. The implication hung in the air, thick and suffocating. Now, Gallo said, his tone shifting from philosophical to practical. My associate and I are going on a very long drive to fix your mistake. We are going to find that bear. It will be a difficult, unpleasant task. And when we return, you and I will have another conversation about the price of disrespect. He turned and walked out. Leo followed, but paused at the door, turning back to look at the terrified manager. He gave Thorne a smile that was all teeth and no warmth. I would not leave town if I were you, Leo advised. He really dislikes it when people run. Then he was gone, and Marcus Thorne was left alone in the sudden, crushing silence of his office, the smell of expensive cologne lingering like a funeral wreath. The drive was 412 miles of darkness. The big sedan devoured the highway, its engine a low hum against the night. Gallo sat in the passenger seat, staring out at the blur of passing lights. He did not speak for the first 100 miles. His mind was not on the port deal, or his other businesses, or the complex web of power he managed every day. It was in the past. He thought of the look on Clara's face. The same look of helpless fury he had seen on his mother as she wiped up the spilled water under the landlord's mocking gaze. He had built a fortress around himself to keep that feeling out. But it had found a way in. Carried by a desperate waitress and a story about a teddy bear. It is a lot of effort, boss, Leo finally said, breaking the silence. For a stranger. Gallo turned his head slowly. She is not a stranger, he said. I have known her my whole life. Leo did not understand, and he knew better than to ask for an explanation. They drove on. They arrived at the Black Creek megadump just as the first hint of grey was staining the eastern sky. The place was monstrous. Mountains of refuse, sculpted by bulldozers, stretched as far as the eye could see. The air was thick with the foul stench of a society's decay. A flock of gulls circled overhead, their cries like mournful shrieks. At the gate, they were met by a local man named Sal, one of Gallo's distant capos who ran operations in the region. Sal was a mountain of a man, but he bowed his head slightly in deference. Mr. Gallo. We are ready. We have the truck's manifest and the driver's dump coordinates. The driver, a nervous man who had been woken up an hour earlier by Sal's men, was waiting by his truck. A large envelope of cash convinced him to be very helpful. He pointed to a specific section of the newest mountain. It is in there, he said, his voice full of disbelief. Somewhere in that 10-ton load. From last night. Gallo looked at the wall of compressed garbage. It was a tomb of plastic bags, broken furniture, and discarded food. Finding a small stuffed bear in it was like finding a specific grain of sand on a beach. Sal's crew, 20 men dressed in heavy work clothes, stood ready with rakes, shovels, and portable floodlights that cut through the pre-dawn gloom. Spread out, Gallo commanded, his voice carrying easily in the still air. We are looking for a child's toy. A teddy bear. The men exchanged glances. They were hard men, used to hard work. But this was different. This was surreal. They obeyed without question. The search began. The work was slow, disgusting, and demoralizing. They raked through layers of filth, the stench clinging to their clothes and hair. Gallo did not just direct. He worked alongside them. The old man, in his $1,000 shoes and tailored slacks, picked up a rake and began to pull apart the garbage with his own hands. Leo and Sal worked on either side of him, their faces grim. Hours passed. The sun rose, casting a sickly yellow light over the landscape of trash. The gulls continued their endless circling. Hope began to fade. The task was impossible. They had cleared a huge area, sifting through tons of refuse. They found broken dolls, discarded electronics, and the sad remnants of countless lives. But no bear. One of the younger men spoke up. Boss! Mr. Gallo, maybe it was destroyed in the compactor. It was a real possibility. That the bear was already shredded and buried, lost forever. Gallo stopped his work. He leaned on his rake, his breath coming in heavy pants. He was not a young man anymore. He looked at the mountain of trash, and for a moment, he felt the crushing weight of futility. Maybe Thorn was right. It was just a thing. A filthy toy. Then he remembered the look in Clara's eyes. It is his father's last promise. "We keep looking," he said, his voice raw with exhaustion but firm with resolve. He bent back to the task. His determination was infectious. The men, seeing their feared leader covered in grime, working harder than any of them, found a new reserve of energy. They attacked the garbage with renewed vigor. It was late afternoon when the shout came. "I found it!" A young man named Paolo was holding up a small, dirt-caked object. It was limp and stained, one of its button eyes was missing, and a seam on its leg was torn. But it was unmistakably a teddy bear. A hush fell over the crew. They all stopped working and stared. Gallo walked over slowly. His legs ached, his back screamed in protest. Paolo handed him the bear as if it were a holy relic. Gallo took it. He held the small, battered toy in his large, scarred hands. It was filthy. It was broken. And it was the most important thing he had held in years. He had found it. He had kept his promise. On the long drive back, the bear sat on the dashboard. Gallo had made a stop. Not at a hotel to rest, but at the home of an old woman, a seamstress who had once worked for his wife. She was woken in the middle of the day. Gallo, standing on her doorstep covered in filth, had asked her for a favor. He watched as her nimble, arthritic fingers carefully washed the bear, stitched its torn leg, and sewed on a new button eye that was a perfect match for the old one. She worked with a quiet reverence, as if she understood the importance of her task without needing to be told. When she was done, Captain Patches looked almost new. Worn and loved, but whole again. Gallo paid her a sum of money that made her gasp, then he and Leo were back on the road. They did not drive back to Clara's small apartment. Leo had made another call. Her son's condition had worsened slightly. She was with him at the City Children's Hospital. They arrived late in the evening. The hospital was quiet, a place of hushed whispers and the soft beep of machines. Gallo, now in a fresh suit, looked completely out of place, a wolf in a sheepfold. Leo stayed back by the elevators. Gallo walked alone down the brightly colored hallway until he found the room number. He paused at the door. Through the small window, he could see Clara asleep in a chair next to a small bed. In the bed lay a small boy, an oxygen tube clipped to his nose. Gallo pushed the door open gently. Clara stirred at the sound, her eyes fluttering open. She sat up with a start when she saw him, her face a mixture of fear and confusion. "What? How did you find me?" Gallo did not answer. He simply walked to the bedside and held out the bear. Clara stared at it. Her hand flew to her mouth. Tears welled in her eyes as she took the toy. She turned it over and over, her fingers tracing the new stitches, touching the new eye. It was clean. It was whole. It was a miracle. "How?" she whispered, looking up at him, her face shining with tears. "Where did you?" "It was lost," Gallo said simply. "Now it is found." The boy in the bed began to stir, his eyes opening. He saw the bear in his mother's hands. "Captain Patches," he rasped, his voice weak. Clara gave him the bear, and the boy hugged it tightly to his chest, a look of pure, unadulterated joy on his pale face. He nestled his face into its soft fur and his breathing seemed to ease, the frantic rasp softening into a more rhythmic sigh. Clara was sobbing now, quiet, grateful tears. She stood up and reached into her purse. "I have to pay you. For your time. It is not much, but—" Gallo raised his hand, stopping her. "You have already paid me," he said. She looked confused. "But I have given you nothing." "You reminded me of something I had forgotten," he said, his voice low. "That is worth more than money." The little boy, still clutching the bear, looked at the large, imposing man standing by his bed. He was not afraid. He saw only the man who had brought his friend back. "Are you a good guy?" the boy asked, his voice clear. The question hung in the sterile air of the hospital room. Gallo looked down at the child. He saw the innocent, trusting eyes, and for a moment, he had no answer. He was a man of violence and fear. A purveyor of shadows. He was not a good guy. But then he looked at the bear in the boy's arms, and at the tear-streaked face of the boy's mother. "I am what your mother needed me to be tonight," he said. It was the most honest answer he could give. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a simple, blank white card. On it was a single phone number, written in black ink. He gave it to Clara. "Your son's medical bills have been taken care of," he said. "All of them. Past and future. A new apartment has been arranged for you, in a safer neighborhood, closer to this hospital. The first year's rent is paid. A job is waiting for you at one of my hotels. As a concierge manager. The pay is triple what you made at the restaurant." Clara was speechless. She could only stare at him, her mind unable to process the magnitude of what he was saying. "If you or your son ever need anything," Gallo said, tapping the card. "Anything at all. You call this number. You are under my protection now." He turned to leave. "Wait," Clara called after him. "Why? Why are you doing all this for me?" Gallo paused at the door, his back to her. "Because a long time ago," he said, without turning around, "no one did it for my mother." And then he was gone. As for Marcus Thorne, his restaurant was shut down the next day. A series of sudden, catastrophic health code violations, fire safety infractions, and tax irregularities were discovered. His suppliers cancelled their contracts. His staff all quit at once. Thorne himself was last seen getting into a dark sedan with two quiet men. He was never heard from again. The problem was permanently closed. He would not be bothering anyone, ever again. 5 years passed. Antonio Gallo sat in his office, a vast room at the top of a skyscraper that overlooked the city he owned. The room was a monument to power and wealth. Italian marble, rare art, a desk carved from a single piece of rosewood. But on that desk, amidst the important documents and private ledgers, sat a small, simple object in a silver frame. It was not a photograph. It was a child's drawing. Done in crayon, it depicted a very large man with a stern face giving a small teddy bear to a smiling boy in a hospital bed. At the bottom, in shaky, childish letters, it said, "To the good guy, from Michael." Leo entered the office. He placed a folder on the desk. "The new shipping manifests, boss." Gallo did not look at them. His gaze was on the drawing. Leo noticed. He had seen the boss staring at that picture 1,000 times. "I saw her last week," Leo said quietly. "Clara. She is running the entire hotel now. Doing a great job. The boy. Michael, he is healthy. Top of his class." Gallo nodded, a faint, almost imperceptible smile touching his lips. He gently traced the crayon outline of the bear with his finger. It was a small act, a single promise kept on a single night 5 years ago. In the grand, violent tapestry of his life, it should have been a meaningless thread. But it was not. It had become the center of the entire design. A man's life is not defined by the empire he builds or the fear he commands. It is not measured in dollars or territories. True courage is not found in the grand gesture, but in the quiet decision to stand up for someone who cannot stand up for themselves. It is found in a 400-mile drive into the darkness, not for profit or for power, but to return a promise to a little boy. For in the end, the world is not saved by kings and conquerors, but by the simple, unwavering kindness of a good guy, even one who lives in the shadows.